All right, veterans, we've got some interesting news. According to UFO lawyer Danny Sheehan, who is the head counsel of the New Paradigm Institute, Luis Elizondo has gone to Washington, D.C. to brief the Trump administration. Let's dive into this.
We were going to have Lue here tonight. Up until yesterday morning, he was prepared to come. He's gotten called to Washington, D.C. He has been and is going to be meeting with Donald Trump Jr. To brief him more on this issue and others inside the administration. And so he is not going to be here.
So that's interesting news, right? So that was March 13th at an event, a live event where Luis Elizondo was allegedly going to be, and Danny Sheehan just reveals there, yeah, look, he was going to be here, but he went to brief Donald Trump Jr. and members of the Trump administration about UFOs, right? UAP. Now, why is that interesting? Well, it's good to know who's out there briefing and doing this and making movements. So clearly, Luis Elizondo is behind the scenes making these moves. I mean, he's on his own book tour as well, so he took time to go do that. I'm curious more than anything about these sort of, when you hear stories like this, oh, this person briefed this and briefed that and briefed them and whatever. That's all interesting. What I'm more curious about is what happens post-briefing, right? What actions does the person that got briefed take on that briefing? Does that make sense? Right? Because they could get it and throw it in a drawer and never think about it again. And then we're like, oh, they briefed them. Yeah, but it doesn't mean anything, right? So it's more how effective is this sort of briefing, right? How effective will it be that Luis Elizondo goes and talks to Don Jr.? Well, to give us a little context, there is a little history between Don Jr. and Luis Elizondo, as you can see from this clip right here.
We're seeing objects that are not just doing that speed, but think of 10,000, 13,000 miles an hour being clocked on radar, multiple different radar systems, and it was being clocked back in the 1950s. Now, temporally speaking, one could say, yeah, maybe we have that technology today somewhere, some country. But if you look where we were in the 1950s, temporally speaking, it just doesn't make sense. That would be like going into King Tut's tomb for the very first time, chiseling away that plaster wall, and all of a sudden seeing behind that wall a fully assembled 747 jet.
I mean, 1950s technology, that was like the beginning of like the F-15 era or something like that, right?
Oh, yeah, before that, actually, we're talking F-105s, we're talking Sabres.
Okay, yeah, maybe that was the 60s, yeah. Because that's 50-year-old technology, yeah. I'm thinking 50 years, not 1950s, but yes, 100%.
Yeah, so, we're talking about technology that we have been encountering over controlled U.S. airspace, over sensitive military installations for the greater part of 70 years, that even today, we can't replicate those performance characteristics.
And that was a live stream that was done back in January, actually right before the weekend, right before Trump was inaugurated. Right. So around the 20th or 19th, 18th, yeah, right, somewhere in there, January, right when UFO whistleblower Jake Barber came out, essentially. I remember this live stream, and he's gone and talked to John Jr. a couple times. So that's why I think this is happening, because they've already had a previous relationship. So Luis Elizondo is going up. Now, was he invited? That's also interesting to know. Was Luis Elizondo invited for this briefing, right? Don Jr. saying, hey, man, I got some people come up to Washington, tell us some stuff. Or did Luis Elizondo go to them with, hey, I have something to tell you, right? Because Don Jr. already knows about a lot of this stuff that he's been told. So the fact that there'll be other members of the administration, it can seem like Don Jr. is sort of the middleman here, helping bring together Luis Elizondo with members of that administration, right? So I don't know. Curious about all the details. So I guess we'll find out. Now, one thing that's kind of interesting about this briefing is something Dr. Stephen Greer said about Luis Elizondo and Don Jr. Because you see, Dr. Stephen Greer has also briefed Donald Trump Jr.
So I, briefly had a quick chat with Don Jr. at a meeting, and he had been taken in by a known counterintelligence person named Lue Elizondo, who is someone working to intercept these whistleblowers and then turn.
You seem to be a big fan of his. It's what I hear.
No, Elizondo is a paid disinformation person. And
how convinced are you of that?
100%. I have an email from the top guy at the CIA who was there when Ronald Reagan wanted to know about this when he was running for governor, who was a very young postdoc, and he immediately wrote and said this is what he's doing. Now, recently, Mr. Elizondo has started saying more correct information. Initially, he said, all of these objects out here, we don't know what they are or how they fly. Now he's admitting we have the man-made ones. And I'll tell you, the vast majority of the UFOs people see, they're not from outer space. They're not alien. They're ours. But they have dangerously been used in false flag operations and deceptive operations, what the Pentagon calls a deceptive indication and warning, or deceptive INW. The pop culture would be false flag, which means you just set up a decoy, you set up a false operation. So that was his primary responsibility when he first emerged, was to gaslight officials, gaslight Congress, and intercept witnesses.
That's a job, right? So
it's a very big job. And there are a lot of people like that out there in what we call the legacy UFO subculture. They're embedded. I mean, they're not going to wear a sign to say, hey, I'm from, this operation. But
is it an actual, is there actually a undisclosed division where your job is to gaslight and confuse people, or is it
absolutely,
or is it everyone's job to gaslight and distract? Because like the opposite of a marketing, how like the propaganda book that was written,
right?
The opposite of marketing, which is you're marketing a lie to confuse the American people, so they're looking here versus here. You're saying there's a division of people that do that intentionally.
Yes, it's a whole counterintelligence, psychological warfare operations out of CIA and other agencies, and that's what they do. And I've known some of these players since the early 90s.
So we can expect Lue Elizondo to show up at Stephen Greer's next birthday party. I'm just kidding. I mean, so Stephen Greer talks to Don Jr., right, and then it's like, oh, he's been taken in by Lue Elizondo, right, because Don Jr. must have mentioned Lue Elizondo to Dr. Greer, and he's like, But clearly Don Jr. is not inviting Stephen Greer up for briefings and presentations, right? And it's such an interesting angle to take, but I just found that those comments to be just interesting, right? Clearly, it's like no one's really taking Dr. Greer seriously about Lue Elizondo, right? What he's saying. He's 100% certain he's some sort of double agent or something. And that's just interesting, right? And clearly, again, Don Jr. doesn't seem to bother him, right? Because it's just Dr. Greer saying that, right? Providing no evidence, just saying it, which is interesting. Dr. Greer must feel, pushed out to some extent, right? If he was the one normally doing these types of things, right? Having these meetings, maybe giving some briefings here and there to different, administrations in power. And now you have other people that have stepped in the lane, right? So again, I'm most curious about what actions Don Jr. and the administration will take after having a briefing with somebody like Lue Elizondo, right? So again, let me know what you guys think in the comments. We'll see you on the next video. Remember, every day's a gift, y'all. Peace.